All right, glad to have you back this morning. Take just a second. I've been asked about some resources and uh, was some, if you want to do personal study in the book of Psalms, one of the kind of, I guess, old time long resources that have been around that probably most preachers hang on to is Spurgeon's commentaries on the Psalms. They are, come takes two books to cover it all. They're both probably that thick. They're pretty weighty. Probably more than maybe a lot of people want. Some of the older English, but I don't have actually one here. But probably one of the best. This is actually on the Gospel of John. Is John Phillips, and you will. If I'm not mistaken, his Old Testament version of these are this same jacket except it's green, and it's probably one of the best for the average person just wanting to read over and learn a little bit more about the Psalms. And so John Phillips, exploring the Psalms, or for that matter, any of his exploring is exploring the Gospel of John, exploring the Galatians. I mean, that's the name of the series of books. They're not on every book of the Bible. And actually, if you look for them, you may not even find, if you're trying to find one, there's a new publisher. Dr. Phillips died a few years ago up in Winston-Salem, and the newer ones that I've seen are actually have a different cover. They're blue across the top and white on the bottom. So you may find them to look just a little bit different. But again, that particular publisher, I'm pretty sure I'm correct that all the New Testament are that pinkish color, in the Old Testament, same design, just green. But those are good books to pick up. That on any of the books he actually wrote them, any of the Bible books that he wrote on, Dr. Phillips does an excellent job. Don't necessarily agree with everything his interpretation, but I don't agree with. Sometimes I don't even agree with my own, and so I agree with most of what he says. And so good set of books. Again, you can buy them individually. They're not that expensive, and so. In fact, I just recently was able to pick up all of them in an online sale. It was digital books on my computer for $79 for the all 30 some books that he's written. So that's a good little commentary on any book you're wanting to study. So this morning, let's jump back into the sixth Psalm. Hope that helped you there with that answer. We've been looking at this Psalm. Again, we skipped it for some reason. Originally, we're going to back up now and pick it up. Going to believe that that's what God somehow wanted us to see them in this order. And this sixth Psalm, David is praying in a time of sickness or perhaps just pain, but in some way, he needs healing. He reveals that here as we pick up in the second verse, that he is praying for healing. And again, it could be pain, could be sickness, not exactly sure. It could be a broke bone, not real sure. But whatever it is, David needs healing. And we began, just to remind you again, that first verse, David cries out, I think, in error, but I think it's good that he does it and we see it, because that's still an issue for many people today. Again, we saw it with Job, that they think that God is reacting in anger. God doesn't react. God makes conscious decisions, and we looked at some of the reasons that people that we do have sickness and pain. And you're welcome to go back and look at yesterday's video if you missed it. So, I'm going to pick up here in the second verse. David says, "Have mercy upon me, O Lord, for I am weak. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are vexed." And so. Well, we're talking about what to do when we're looking for healing. When we need healing, the first thing again is again to understand that truth that God does not act or react in anger. Satan will use that as a weapon against us and cause us to question God and doubt God. God never, now again, it may be discipline, it may be, again, natural causes, just simply the result of age and sinful world, but our own bad decisions. But God does not send sin, pain, sickness, suffering as a reaction. His desire, actually, and we see that throughout the New Testament, is that man would repent. So then the second thing that we learn about this, and this may seem for some of you kind of like a duh moment. David asked God to heal him. That's the second thing that we need to know about praying for healing, is pray for healing. And I say that because some people, it seems some believers, genuine believers, hesitate to pray for themselves. They'll pray for, every Tom, Dick, and Harry. They'll pray for, the missionaries in Africa. They will pray for everybody on the prayer list, people that they don't know, from Adam's house cat. They'll pray for people that don't even know their name, or just heal the sick, wherever they are. But we sometimes feel almost embarrassed to pray for our own self, and so I may be stretching just a little bit here, kind of one of the lessons, but I do think it's a lesson for us. Is that David was not, and we don't see God rebuking him for that. David prays for himself. So again, it's perfectly all right to pray for others. It's perfectly all right to pray for the missionaries in Africa. It's perfectly all right to pray for all the sick around the world. It's perfectly all right to, sit in front of the hospital and pray, Lord, heal everybody in it. You don't have to know who's in it. That's fine. But if I can do that, I certainly can pray for myself. But I'm thinking the majority of people who are going to be, going to be watching this and looking in today, you're going to say, "Well, I know that," and I know. I'm just saying I've come into contact over the years in ministry with some people who they almost, it seems, if they feel ashamed to pray for themselves. And I just, I hate that because, again, obviously we're supposed to pray for others. The Bible tells us to pray for others. James tells us, for example, to pray for those that are sick. And, you could make the case even that I believe you could make a really strong case that it's even a sin not to pray for others, but it's absolutely not a sin to pray for yourself. I just think that's something. Let me get that one off my chest this morning. And so, what does David do here? When does he pray? He says, "I'm weak. Heal me." So obviously, David is praying for himself when he is in a bad situation. Have mercy on me. And the word mercy, we've talked about this word already several times in the Psalms. It is the idea of giving us what we don't deserve. This particular word, to be specific, is the idea of stooping down in kindness. And so David is begging God to stoop down in kindness and compassion because he says, "I am weak. I can't do this for myself. I can't. I don't have the ability to do anything about this pain." Sometimes we can. Probably one of the first. Not I was going to say one of the first bad jokes I learned, but it's probably one of the first jokes I learned. Was the man goes to the doctor and says, "Doc, when I do this, it hurts." And the doctor says, "Well, don't do that." Sometimes we can fix our own pain. but sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can get ourselves out of that painful situation, but many times we can't. And so David acknowledges here, Lord, there's nothing that I can do. I am physically weak. I am unable to do anything about my current situation. The words that he uses here to describe when he says that he is weak is a word that again that would be used as a Hebrew word that would describe like leaves, plants withering away. That's how David feels at this time. He's in some type of horrible pain. So bad, in fact, that he says all the way down to my bones, to the very heart of my being, my bones are hurting. Not only was he physically suffering, but he goes on in verse 3, he says, my soul is sore vexed, but thou, O Lord, how long? So not only physically, and all of you have experienced this, when you're so physically hurting, physically sick, that eventually it begins to affect you emotionally. And that's where David is. My soul, not only my bones are vexed, which would be physical, but my soul is vexed, which would be emotional. I am, and that word vexed, I mean, think about it. How often do you use the word vexed? I mean, this is a pretty strong word David's using here. He is, again, his emotional pain seems to be as great as his physical pain, perhaps worse than his physical pain. And probably all of us have been there sometimes. When you're sick and you just get to, you're just emotionally, when you're sick and tired of being tired and sick. And David is on there, and all of us know that being sick, pain, it can cause us to go into depression, and we've all heard, unfortunately, that there are people who end up taking their own life because of the amount of pain physically that they're in. And so David is physically and emotionally wore out, shot. And so verse then 4-7 kind of shows us how David is going to reply to that then. He begins in verse 4. He says, return, O Lord, deliver my soul. O save me for thy mercies. And so I think what David is saying here is, return, O Lord, deliver my soul, save me for thy mercies. He's already told us his bones, that he was physically in agony, that emotionally he is in agony. But again, I think most of us can identify with this. When you're physically in agony, it leads to being emotionally in agony. And then when you're physically and emotionally in pain and sick and agony, eventually it leads to spiritual situation. Satan will, you're laying there in the bed in agony, and Satan will crawl up beside of you, and, God must not love you. Read the book of Job. There it is. David is physically, emotionally, and now in verse 4, I think he is telling us that spiritually he is drained as well. Some believe that what was going on here ultimately was the punishment of God for unrepented sin, which is why David starts in that first verse the way he does about don't judge me, don't punish me in your anger. And so David here now is physically and spiritually he's feeling, as low as he could feel. And so he is begging God to turn back to him. And he does it. Again, he says here, return, O Lord, deliver my soul, O save me for thy mercies. Not because I deserve it, because I know you are a just and merciful, healing God. Not because I've done anything that deserves, to be blessed by you. And so he's crying out that God would spare his life, and that God would restore him physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I think sometimes that may be one of the areas that sometimes we miss in physical, in times of physical distress, is we get so we're so focused on feeling better physically that we overlook the spiritual message that God is trying to get through in that time. I talked about before, and my wife and family can certainly verify this, that I had the misfortune when I worked for the bakery of understanding their accounting system. And by understanding their accounting system, what I understood is that sometimes 2 plus 2 is 4, and sometimes 2 plus 2 is yellow. Uh, and so I spent a great deal of time on the road, going around to our different locations, fixing the accounting and straightening up the messes that I would encounter. And the man who was kind of my mentor in management and in the bread business told me one time something I've never forgotten. I've applied this in a lot of other places. I was complaining about always having to be gone straightening out other people's messes. And then when I would get back to my area, I'd have a mess. I'd have to fix my mess, and because I'd been gone. Anyway, and he told me one time, he says, I know it's bad, I know you don't, but he says, never let them send you anywhere that you don't learn something that helps make you better. And I've tried to keep that little lesson in mind in a lot of different ways. And so one of the things I would say out of this psalm, and again, I may be way off base here. If you go by that commentary I told you a while ago, I'm just talking to you from my heart. What I see in these psalms is sometimes sickness and pain. We get so caught up in trying to feel better physically that we overlook the spiritual growth and opportunity that God has put in front of us. The situation we're in right now. And hopefully, as we're traveling along here, we're easing up some of the restrictions. But we've been under this quarantine and stay home order. I've made mention several times to our church family. Make the best of it. While you're at home, can't go anywhere. And hopefully, maybe that's what you're doing right now. Is spend some extra time in your Bible. You can't go anywhere else. You can't go out to eat. So spend some time with God. Spend some of that time in prayer. And so David here, not only physically and emotionally, but spiritually, he's crying out for God's intervention, that God would step in and heal him. He makes a kind of I don't know, I see it as almost sarcastic, but I don't necessarily think so. But David says in verse 5, "For in death there's no remembrance of thee. In the grave who'll give you thanks? Lord, if you let me die." It tells me two things. David thought he was going to die. That's how bad his situation was. But not only that, David, he makes a good argument there. Lord, if you want me to praise you, you can't kill me. If I'm gonna, if I'm gonna serve you and praise you, I can't do it from the grave. And so he begs for his life. And he's that's how sick David thinks he is. It's also, I think, a warning about the risk and the danger of sin. Again, I do think this psalm was written out of some situation in David's life of unconfessed, unrepented sin. And God had finally, because David wouldn't repent on his own, God had finally brought him to his knees, if you will. And if David would have continued in that sin, perhaps it was after the sin with Bathsheba. But it's hard to say. But sin can cause us a great deal of trouble. David says, "I'm weary with my groaning all the night. Make I my bed to swim. I water my couch with tears." David says, I cannot take this any longer. Mine eye is consumed because of grief. It waxeth old because of all my enemies. David at this point is, he's at rock bottom. He's broken. Again, we've talked about it emotionally, physically, spiritually. David has hit the absolute bottom in every area of his life. He is worn out. He is totally exhausted. Talks like it's even hard to breathe. He's moaning in grief, tormenting grief. His pain. Sound like maybe David got the corona. He's that. He's eyes. He's crying. He's consumed with grief. He is absolutely to rock bottom. And David is to the point here, and this is one of the things we have to be aware of sin. He says it gets old because of my enemies. My enemies are enjoying what I'm going through. Again, David, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and now fourth thing that's tormenting him is that his enemies are gloating. And that leads to one thought: maybe David had been injured in battle. We don't know, but from his enemies are the proverbial rubbing salt in his wounds. And so, just kind of, I tried to hurry through that because I want to get to the bottom of it here to say, you ever felt that way? We feel that way sometimes. We have friends who get in, and we're like David, cry out, how long is this going to go on? And a couple things that I want you to take away from this psalm that I think are important because we have had some teaching over the years that I think has been misconstrued and led people off bat. One of them is, again, when we talked about this, you can pray for yourself. You should pray for yourself. But the second thing is it's okay to ask God questions. Read that psalm again. It's okay to ask God questions. Now, I know you're like me. You've heard all your life, don't question God. I agree with that statement. If you mean by that the same thing I mean. If questioning God means you're shaking your fist in the face of God saying you can't do this, you're wrong, that kind of thing, yeah. But I don't think Jesus himself on the cross said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Remember anything about your high school English? Why hast thou forsaken me ends with what kind of punctuation mark? A question mark. God is a big, strong, tough God. He can handle a little bit of questioning from us. I don't think most of us mind our children asking us questions. Again, when they defy our authority, that's different. When they ask for an explanation, I don't think most of us, again, depending on their tone, their attitude. And so if we learn nothing else from this psalm, I think those are two great lessons to walk away with, is that it's all right to pray for ourselves, and that we can ask God for clarification. And then third thing is, even the godly do suffer. Fourth thing we can take away from it, and this is where I'll leave you today, is that there is always a consequence to sin. Sin, you can get forgiveness, but there is a consequence. I love my dogs. There is a consequence to sin. All right? Hope you think about that. Hope it'll help you a little bit, because all of us face struggles. All of us face battles. And we'll see you tomorrow to finish up this little psalm. Have a great day.